Throughout the entirety of the evolution of Library of Ruina's combat meta, passives and effects that increase power have always been superior to the ones that increase damage. From Yasad nearing having plus 8 power with blunt dice, to Emma rampaging with high cost combat pages, the introduction of Fervor, the Red Mist, the Purple Tears pages, Light Unlock, the list goes on for miles. However, there was a point in time where damage reigned supreme over power, a time when a new mechanic took the meta by storm for 2 weeks before fading into obscurity due to lack of support. That mechanic is smoke. Smoke is a status effect that was introduced in the same update as the reception of the Smiling Faces in Urban Nightmare 2, bringing 4 passives, 7 combat pages, and the status effect itself. Smoke increases the damage the character takes by 5% per stack, maxing out its 10 stacks with 50%. But a character with 9 or more smoke also gains 1 power to all dice. However, due to the amount of damage you take when you have that much smoke, it's generally not a good idea to have it at all, unless you have the passive Puffy Broom. Puffy Broom is the 1-cost passive that instead of increasing the damage you take, it increases the damage you deal. Combining Puffy Broom with 10 smoke on the enemy doubles the amount of damage you deal with attacks. One thing to note about smoke pages is that they tend to have very good draw power, but weak light regeneration. As a result, it makes sense to keep 1 or 2 light regen cards in your deck, such as Extract Fuel or Gigi. The majority of smoke pages were blunt focused when they were introduced, meaning they added to the dominance that Yasad's floor held at the time. Combined with metallic ringing, pages like Deep Drag, Trace of Fumes, and Inhale Smoke were all incredibly powerful when used with the 3 named key pages introduced with the update. Since then, we have a lot more slash-focused smoke attacks, but still are missing Pierce dice in the category. Smoke decks rely a lot more on the passives you were using than they do the actual cards you bring. Puffy Broom is an absolutely necessary for the setup, and knowing this means you can turn any key page with at least 4 attribution slots into one that benefits very heavily from smoke. Just bring 1 copy of Smoking Pipe, 2 copies of Inhale Smoke, and 1 copy of Vapor, and the rest of your deck is free for whatever you want. All of the named pages from the Smiling Faces reception are wonderful for this, as are the named pages from the Leo Association, Boris, and a few others. Ironically, the reception of the Blue Reverberation adds a key page that is smoke-focused that should not be used as a base. This is because it only has 1 speed die but has a lot of unique passives, meaning you have very few passive slots to work with. It does, however, give the internal combustion engine passive, which increases smoke gain from combat pages by 1. Using this passive means Inhale Smoke can give 9 smoke when used a single time, but it also opens up smoke gain that provides less total to be used more consistently, like Guidance of the Gears, one of the only reliable light gain that works with smoke. There are 3 other passives that have impact on smoke, all of which are cheap enough to run in any smoke setup as long as you have spare passive slots. Sooty Thwack is Wang's exclusive passive. Sooty Thwack increases the stagger damage you deal by 10% times the amount of smoke you have on your character. This is simply a method to increase the stagger damage along with the damage of your attacks, though it is a 10% boost instead of a 5% boost, so it's significantly stronger than Puffy Broom itself. Stimulating Fumes is Mii's exclusive passive, and it works like a counter die that doesn't recycle. It gives a block dice that responds to a one-sided attack as long as you have smoke, with the roll being 1 at minimum, capping out at how much smoke you currently have. This is the least useful passive out of the bunch. Smoke Addiction is Jin's exclusive passive. When a character with this passive hits an enemy who has 8 or more smoke, that enemy gets inflicted with 2 paralysis next scene, only 1 time per enemy. With how powerful of a status paralysis actually is, this is incredibly useful in smoke infliction decks. If you want to lean more heavily into smoke than just running Puffy Broom with smoke gain, you are going to want some decent maintenance power in your smoke decks. In terms of combat pages, light regen should always come first. For smoke-heavy builds, Smoking Pipe and Guidance of the Gears are your main options, with each providing a net gain of 1 light when used. Both are inherently defensive, however. When looking for card draw, you simply need to lock your eyes onto Vapor, or Deep Drag if you haven't beaten the Blue Reverberation yet, which gives you smoke and draws 1 card on use, while also inflicting a decent amount of smoke to the enemy. With how high Vapor rolls, it's unlikely to not hit with it too. When it comes to keeping your own smoke capped off, nothing gets better than Inhale Smoke, which gives 7 smoke without internal combustion engine. However, if you're looking for mid-cost options, you do have some choices as well. Defense Order leads with a very high block roll, which I personally am a big fan of, and gives you 4 smoke, while Autonomous Rush gives you 2 smoke and hits harder than most other smoke cards. Smoke Infliction is a little less consistent in practice, but when combined with Smoke Gain, can be incredibly lethal as long as the targets don't have Puffy Broom themselves. There are two forms of this, Smoke Infliction with and without Puffy Broom. Without Puffy Broom, your only options for Smoke Infliction are Deep Drag and Trace of Fumes. Both of these attacks inflict good amounts of smoke on hit and don't give the user any smoke, meaning you can run them in any deck. Deep Drag is especially good since it gives page draw and is surprisingly consistent to hit. Every offensive die on both of these pages are blunt, the only damage type with two passives to boost its power. When run on Emma's page or Puppet page 2, these attacks turn in from great to ridiculous. Though these key pages have since fallen off recently, they are still usable. The previously mentioned Autonomous Rush and Vapor both inflict smoke and give the user smoke, meaning they need to run Puffy Broom to perform to their best abilities, but both are very solid attacks in their own right if you wanted to use them. There are a handful of attacks that go along with Smoke Infliction that are hard to run on the page that actually uses the infliction itself, those being Loss of Senses, Flesh Fillet, and Assault Order. Assault Order is bad. The power increase it gains isn't enough to warrant running it over additional copies of Trace of Fumes or any other too light too offensive die combat page. Loss of Senses is meant to work with the Smoke Addiction passive to inflict even more paralysis if the opponent has at least 7 smoke currently, and also is very powerful draw support, giving 2 cards if the target has 3 or more smoke. These last 2 pages are the only ones that use smoke as currency. We'll start with Flesh Fillet since I've already mentioned it. 2 smoke boosts the power of every die on the page by 2, giving you a double slash page with a 6-10 and 5-9 roll, both of which inflict bleed. The second inflicting 1 bleed for every 2 smoke on the target. It's hard to keep the enemy smoke high, but if used with the passives Dark Cloud Blade, Digging Shank, and Razor Strike, this attack has the potential to roll 7 to 11 and 6 to 10, and inflict up to 10 bleed by itself. This is the highest amount of bleed a single combat page can inflict without help from the purple tier or buffs from other combat pages. Hidden Blade consumes the same amount of smoke for the same power boost, making it a 4-11, 6-10, although the first die is evade instead of slash. This is the highest evade die of any 1-cost page, and can be run with the +1 evade die that the Church of Gears follower gets by default, if you want to run that key page. Either way, this is a pretty solid defensive option that still inflicts bleed. When building your decks around smoke, anything that increases your damage is a good choice, especially if you plan to run Puffy Broom instead of focusing on infliction. There are 2 combat pages that do this, and a lot of passives, which we'll briefly go over in order how powerful they are. Rushdown is a 1-cost page that increases all of your damage dealt by 1 on the turn you use it. 1 damage isn't a lot, so you'd probably want to compound it with other effects too. Les Règles is a 3-cost page that increases the whole party's damage by 2 next scene. If an enemy, or just the user, has 6 or more smoke, this translates to an additional +1 damage in essence, which doesn't seem like a lot, but trust me, this boost compounds quickly with passive and abnormality page effects. There are several passives that increase the damage of a certain dice type, but the standout of Smoke Infliction decks is Punch to the Solar Plexus, which gives +2 damage to blunt dice, the main dice type of Deep Drag and Trace of Fumes. Meat Gear increases the damage of the first offensive die on each combat page by 2 to 3, which is very solid for most smoke cards. It is also found on the Church of Gears follower page by default, meaning you don't need to attribute it if you want to use that key page. I wouldn't recommend running Maximum Crash on a smoke user or inflictor since it requires charge to function, though if somebody else wears Maxim's page on your smoke floor, it makes your damage output on that character shoot through the stratosphere. Finishing Touch can only be applied to 1 target, though the 50% damage compounded with 10 smoke on both characters results in a 150% increase in damage output, which is a boost that shouldn't be possible with pages that can roll up to 35. I have no idea what Yan's passive is called, but it can increase the damage you deal by 1, I guess. It's something. Several floors also have abnormality pages that increase your damage output. Malkuth's floor has Worker Bee, which increases the damage towards the enemy who deals the most damage to the selected librarian, which isn't consistent, but it is a good damage boost for smoke users in any case. Gluttony also gives a 1 to 3 damage boost when attacking an enemy who has already been damaged during the scene, which isn't much, but it does help you if you've already had your smoke inflictors hitting all the enemies the selected character is targeting. Yassad's floor has music, which is basically a surefire way to make smoke users turn into walking nukes when paired with 2 inflictors, and it's part of the reason why Yassad's floor was so powerful when smoke was first introduced. The only downside is that the 1-4 boost only lasts for 1 act. Yassad also has the 7th Bullet, a page I never thought I'd recommend, which turns your main smoke inflictor into an expert on upping damage. Keep it on an inflictor and give everyone Puffy Broom, however, otherwise the damage you sometimes deal to allies will become too much of a detriment. Lastly, while repetitive pattern recognition doesn't increase your damage, smoke does make it easier to activate the effect of this abnormality page, giving more momentum to your strongest clasher. Yassad probably still has the strongest floor for smoke team in usage. Hod's floor has Glitter, which increases the selected librarian's damage against allured targets by 3 to 5, which is a massive boost. Of course, Glitter can sometimes cause you to take more damage than you want, so Hod will not be your best choice. Good to put onto a Puffy Broom attacker, however. Tifereth's floor only has Justice, which provides a bigger damage bonus than Worker Bee, but is a little harder to control since it's the damage to all of your characters that determines who becomes the villain. Geberos floor has the best damage increase card in the game, being Fear of Water, which increases your damage by 3 to 7. It also inflicts bleed on hit, though the self-damage makes it hard to support. It pairs well with Vampirism, which increases your damage by an additional 2 to 4, causes more bleed, and can even heal the user for most of Fear's damage. These 2 pages can increase your damage output if you have 9 smoke by 8 to 17, which is the highest boost in damage you can get from abnormality pages. Chesed's floor has Home, which is hard to use, but 9 smoke on the user gives an additional damage from this effect, so it is technically a bonus. Also, while Heart doesn't increase your damage, smoke does make its effect easier to trigger, so consider grabbing it if you're using a couple smoke users on Chesed's floor. Vino's floor has Punishing Beak, which is great for smoke users provided you keep the selected librarian from taking damage, which can be a little tricky. Peace also increases your damage dealt to a target you get to pick, but not by enough to warrant being picked over the other Emotion 3 pages on the floor, in my opinion. Pakma's floor has Gaze of Others, which increases your damage by 2 to 4 in a one-sided attack, and Smoke helps to counteract the decreased damage you would now deal during clashes. Apostles also increases the damage of all allies except the one you select by 2 to 7, which is a massive amount for Smoke users in general use as well. Power increases also increase your damage, just not by as much as these effects when isolated. Keep in mind that Smoke is a strategy that is best executed when multiple people on the floor are using it, meaning you'll want to pick a floor that can easily support all of your Smoke users. Having heard all the options, I would recommend that you pick Yassad, Gebura, or Hawkma as your main users of Smoke. Now that we've got a better feel on Smoke and how it's generally supposed to be used, let's go over some basic decks that I've built in order to try to maximize the effects of using Smoke. Our first deck utilizes Maze Page as a base and attributes the passives Puffy Broom, Internal Combustion Engine, Meat Gear, and Grace of the Prescript. It contains 2 copies of Smoking Pipe, 1 copy of Inhale Smoke, 2 Autonomous Rush, 1 Will of the City, 1 Loss of Senses, 1 Le Regule, and 1 Vapor. These decks are all going to look rather similar, but that's only because there isn't a lot of variety when it comes to good Smoke pages. I tried to make this first deck to have simply some smoke gain and then run several powerful attacks, but decided that it would be better to work as a Regule Smoke attacker and run a more basic set of Smoke pages. This setup boosts your damage significantly for the whole party, especially if they all use Smoke. If you don't yet have Will of the City, consider running Gale Kick or High Kick to replace it. Our second build today utilizes Emma's page as a base. Attribute the passives Puppet Skeleton, Sooty Thwack, Puffy Broom, and Meat Gear. Bring 1 copy of Puppet Blockade, 1 Inhale Smoke, 2 Guidance of the Gears, 3 Deep Drag, and 2 Loss of Senses. Emma's page has a unique property of being able to turn Deep Drag into a 922 blunt roll without any effort, making her perfectly suited for a heavy smoke inflictor. You don't need to run Puffy Broom on this setup if you don't want to. Simply replace the Inhale Smoke and Guidance pages with Puppet Blockade, PvP, or any blunt 3 cost you'd like. I would recommend Repressed Flesh or Heavy Peaks. Our third setup uses Wang's page as a base. Attribute the passives Internal Combustion Engine, Meat Gear, you noticing a pattern yet? Smoke Addiction, and Grace of the Prescript. Bring 1 Frontal Assault, 1 Unlock, 2 Guidance of the Gears, 2 Autonomous Rush, 1 Relay Regule, and 2 Vapor. Wang's Page is an excellent option if you're focused on maximizing your stagger damage to as many enemies as possible. This setup combines that with Les Regale to empower your team, making it a very viable high damage and stagger support with plenty of momentum sustaining cards like Guidance and Unlock. Our fourth deck of the day utilizes Mi's Page as a base, and attributes the passive Internal Combustion Engine, Meat Gear, Smoke Addiction, and Fervor. Bring 2 Smoking Pipe, 2 Sword of Volition, 2 Inhale Smoke, 1 Defense Order, 1 Loss of Senses, and 1 Vapor. Sword of Volition is one of my new favorite cards, so I decided to set up a build to show it off. Fervor increases all of your damage once past Emotion 3, making this setup good for longer battles. Smoke Addiction plays into smoke teams to allow you to inflict paralysis, and all of your attacks together are very effective in general. This is the only build with a reliable way to counter mass attacks as well, only because the only real option in that department for smoke users is Loss of Senses, which falls off by the time you hit Star of the City Tier 3. Our last deck of the day uses Jin's Page as a base, and attributes the passives Sooty Thwack, Finishing Touch, yes I'm serious, Internal Combustion Engine, and Meat Gear. Bring 1 Smoking Pipe, 1 Frontal Assault, 1 Rush Down, 1 Guidance of the Gears, 2 Autonomous Rush, 2 Deep Drag, and 1 Vapor. This last build leans heavily on Smoke Infliction and team play rather than trying to deal damage on its own. If you don't want to attribute Finishing Touch, simply bring Nikolai along with any Smoke team to make the work that much easier, or better yet, attribute Puffy Broom and Internal Combustion Engine to Nikolai, and have her run 2 copies of Inhale Smoke and 1 of Vapor. The only reason I have Rush down here, by the way, is because I only have 2 copies of Les Regale total, so I couldn't bring all 3 to the same team, which I find very disappointing. I'm sorry. For this guide, I also accepted a couple of fan-submitted builds, all involving smoke. The first build I'd like to highlight was submitted by Gold on my Discord server, and uses Callow's Page as a base, and attributes the passives Puffy Broom, Internal Combustion Engine, and either Stimulating Fumes or Grace of the Prescript, depending on if you want to be more defensive or offensive. This is a singleton build that uses Frontal Assault, Inhale Smoke, Suppressing Shot, Guidance of the Gears, Multi-Slash, Shock Round, Will of the Prescript, Deep Drag, and Focus Fire. The main issues with this build is that if you start out the act with a bad hand, it tends to result in the entire act ending up not well for this build specifically. It definitely works better in a team rather than just by itself, as it provides buffs and smoke for everybody on the team rather than just itself. Even on its own, this build is capable of dealing very high range damage, and shouldn't be underestimated, especially when compared to other builds that were showcased in this video. The other build that was submitted to me over Discord is intended to be used in sets of either 2 or 3 at a time. Ideally, you would be using this build on multiple characters on the same floor. This build uses Boris's key page as a base, and attributes the passives Puffy Broom, Internal Combustion Engine, and Sooty Thwack. The other 2 passive slots don't matter as much, so I chose Health Hauler and Electric Shock. This is another singleton deck that uses Smoking Pipe, Inhale Smoke, Guidance of the Gears, Multi-Slash, Will of the Prescript, Deep Drag, Loss of Senses, Les Regale, and Discipline. I tested this build out against the Index proxies, and it seemed to be quite effective at dealing damage overall. Discipline was regularly hitting for over 20 points, once smoke was inflicted and obtained by the character. This setup tends to be very powerful when utilized on multiple people on the same floor. As soon as Smoke receives another set of pages that fit within its gimmick, I can see it immediately becoming a part of this game's mainstream once again. As it is now, this effect is indispensable against boss fights like the Red Mist and Shao, allowing you to deal far more damage to them. Certainly better if the entire floor is using smoke-related setups as opposed to just one person, but having an inflictor on each floor is a pretty good idea. Thanks everybody for watching. I hope you have a fun time incorporating smoke into your builds from this point onwards, and I hope you have a better idea of how to build around smoke in the future as well. Keep on smoking that pipe, blaze forward with new strategies like the ones I showcased in this video, and I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Goodbye.